Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Friday, July 26th. So before we head into the weekend here, we have some updates from NFL training camp that we have to dive into, some key injury updates with quarterbacks such as Russell Wilson and Kirk Cousins. So we are going to be diving into both of those injury situations, one a little bit more negative, one more so positive. So we will touch on both of those stories. Additionally, I'm going to be giving some names of rookies this year that I am anticipating to see big seasons out of. Players that are in situations I feel like that can make an immediate impact. And, there's obviously so many talented players, but a lot of times it takes some time to develop a lot of these young players. But there are a few situations where I actually think it is going to lead to some really big year one production from a number of guys. So we are going to be diving into that before then continuing on with our previews for all 32 NFL teams, as today we have the Indianapolis Colts. So we will be breaking down the season ahead for them. And then finally, we got a trade yesterday out of the MLB. The Seattle Mariners are trading for Tampa Bay Rays outfielder Randy Arozarena. So we're going to be talking about that deal, as the former All-Star is on his way to a situation where they really do need him at this point. So we'll be talking about that deal, what it means for the Rays and the Mariners. But before we get into everything, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. Let us know any questions you have as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a comment, it'll pop up on screen for everybody to see, so you can become a bigger part of the show. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Last season, obviously, was not the best. It was, you can argue, maybe a little bit of a career low for Russell Wilson, as the tensions between him and the Denver Broncos were just very extreme. Obviously, the fit with Wilson and the Broncos bringing in head coach Sean Payton was just never there, and it ultimately led to a bit of a disastrous situation there. And while I do feel like we are seeing Russell Wilson, I don't know if I'm ready to go quite twilight years of his career. He's definitely past his prime at this point. He believes that he is still capable of providing winning football to an organization, and that's the mission that he is out to prove this year, as he signed a one-year deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But it has not been a great start so far in training camp, as a couple days ago he ended up getting hurt with a calf injury as he was doing conditioning drills. I believe it was reported that it was as he was pushing a sled of sorts, and he is now being held out for the second straight day of training camp today. And this is obviously also in the midst of a little bit of a quarterback battle, because he is competing with former first-round selection Justin Fields for that starting spot. Fields is another player that feels like he can be a starting quarterback. He was a first-round selection in 2021, and last year I thought that he played the best football of his career. But even still, when it was clear that the Bears were number one on the clock in the draft this year for the second consecutive year, their organization could not justify passing up on using that pick for a quarterback in a second straight year based off of what Fields had shown. And like I mentioned, Fields had his best year of his career last season. I thought he flashed a lot of promise, but in terms of the arm talent and the consistency in the passing game, we haven't really seen it. On top of that, the turnovers have been a very big issue with Justin Fields, especially the fumbling, which is something that you feel like should be something that is pretty easily correctable, but At the same time, just last season, there was a lot of momentum being built, and it seemed like the Justin Fields had a golden opportunity to prove to the Bears that he was worth investing into further, but the Bears couldn't pass up on the opportunity to take Caleb Williams, so that's what they did. And ultimately, when they were shopping Fields around, there weren't very many landing spots for him, so he ends up getting traded to the Steelers for a conditional 6th round draft pick. And now, as things stand, it is Fields and Wilson who both feel like they should be a starting quarterback in the league, and they are competing for that one job. So ultimately, the general consensus here is that Russell Wilson is likely going to get the first shot at the starting quarterback job, but this injury opens the door for Justin Fields to make some noise because Fields is taking first team reps once again. I believe, initially listed behind Russell Wilson on that depth chart. It's a little bit of a quarterback battle still, but Wilson, given his experience and such, he has the edge on Justin Fields in this category. We have a comment from Shots Below the Belt. Hard to throw the ball consistently with a bad offensive line. What are the chances of Justin Fields beating out Russell Wilson and having a bounce back season? Absolutely. Justin Fields was somebody who was, I don't know if I'm ready to fully go done wrong by the Bears. The Bears definitely didn't do him favors. Now, they traded for DJ Moore last season. The offensive line was definitely improved from year 1 to year 3, but also that's not saying all that much because it was a bit disastrous early on. So I think that there was a lot of promise with Fields. Again, though, the Bears, I can also understand from their perspective, resetting the quarterback market, or not resetting the quarterback market, but resetting the contract that they have to give because they would have had to pay Justin Fields big money, and there is still a pretty decently sized question mark surrounding what he could be. And I was somebody that I was never really on board with the Justin Fields hype train that was sort of coming around. It felt like last offseason, but I came out of this year definitely feeling a lot better about him. And I do think that there is a real chance that Justin Fields, if given an opportunity with this Steelers offense, that he could show that he would be a worthy starting quarterback. But again, the Steelers, who at this point have been searching for a playoff win. I believe the last time they won in the playoffs was 2016. So as much as, yes, it would be nice for them to end up with a franchise quarterback, Mike Tomlin has been a little bit frustrated with the roster situation there. Now, he did just re-up on a new contract extension to remain the head coach for the foreseeable future. So that is maybe something that can be considered. But ultimately, Russell Wilson is going to have the in. But this is why this time in training camp is very crucial for Justin Fields to show what he has. Because during the season, I don't think that there are going to be necessarily a tremendous amount of opportunities for him, especially if Wilson starts week 1. The Steelers' schedule only gets more difficult as the season is going to progress. We talked about this in the preview for the Steelers season just a few days ago. From week 11 on, you are playing a ton of good defenses. You have the Ravens, the Browns, Bengals, maybe not necessarily an elite defense, but there's an offense on the other side that you're going to have to compete with. You get the Browns again, you get the Eagles, the Ravens again, the Chiefs, and the Bengals. So all of those are projected playoff teams. And Justin Fields, it would take a lot for him, even if you believe in the talent, to go on some type of a winning run down the stretch of this year, headed into an offseason where he is going to try to get paid. So I definitely do think that this is a better situation for Fields, and he is in a good opportunity to bounce back. But again, when is he going to get that opportunity? It feels like to some degree, if he is going to come into this season and really make some noise, it's going to have to be early on, whether it be taking advantage of this opportunity with Russell Wilson not being present for training camp. And I'm sure Tomlin, the way that he has spoken about the quarterback battle, he's going to try and make this as fair as possible. And the idea of you can't lose your job to an injury, I feel like, especially with some degree of unproven. Now, obviously, Russell Wilson has nothing to prove in terms of his legacy. He's already accomplished the peak. He was a top quarterback in the league for a number of years, won a Super Bowl, made it to another. But you know how the NFL works. It is a factory that is constantly revolving. So what have you done for me lately is always the conversation in this league. So Russell Wilson, in that sense, does have something to prove, as does Justin Fields. So it's going to be a quarterback battle that, I mean, we're going to be hearing about this, you would have to imagine, all season long, considering we understand that both of these quarterbacks are starting caliber. But it is going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. Ultimately, how I think it does is that, you know, you look at the beginning part of the season. I should have uploaded my schedule that I had for the Steelers so you could follow along on screen. But there are a number of very winnable games for the Steelers early on. They're playing the Falcons, who are going to be a good team, but, you know, aren't necessarily world beaters by any means. They have the Broncos. They have a young Chargers team. If Russell Wilson can't take advantage of these early opportunities, I think Justin Fields comes in, and we know the upside with Fields is far higher, in my opinion at least, than what Russell Wilson can give you at this point in their career, in their respective careers. But at the same time, this Steelers defense is always competitive. They were top 6 in scoring last year, and they just need some form of consistency from that quarterback position that they didn't get last year with the likes of Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and Mitchell Trubisky. So if Russell Wilson can at least just be a safe option, which, to be fair, also isn't necessarily what Justin Fields was. Like I mentioned, turnovers were a big issue. And what the Steelers are hoping from their offense is they can at least give them a chance to win. And I think that both of these quarterbacks can do that. But it's an interesting conversation in terms of what are they currently looking for. I would imagine it's day one on the field production, but Justin Fields does have still a lot in that tank, I think, and I am rooting for him to find a spot, whether it be with the Steelers or another franchise, because he had a tough go early on in his career, and I do still believe in him. Shots Below the Belt says, if Russell Wilson gets benched this upcoming season, will he ever be looked at as a starter again? I have to say no, because at this point, you know, what are you getting out of Russell Wilson? Like I just mentioned, this is a Steelers team that, no, they're not necessarily a tier 1, probably not tier 2, maybe not even a tier 3 championship contender this season, but they made the playoffs last year with atrocious quarterback play. So what they are hoping, and what any team would be hoping from Russell Wilson at this point, is just to provide stability. And if Russell Wilson can't do so in this situation, I'm curious what team is really going to go and give him another chance. Now, there's still a chance that he could be in the NFL. I feel like Russell Wilson wouldn't be too on board with being a backup quarterback, but I think that ultimately, you know, if Russell Wilson can't succeed in this environment, then and he gets benched, specifically to your question, I don't think that there's going to be another team that's going to say, well, it's worth us just sort of hanging around in middle ground. Now, that being said, if there were a team that I could see giving Russell Wilson a chance after this year, maybe the New York Jets, because the majority of teams at this point, they either have their franchise quarterback or they're looking for their franchise quarterback. There aren't too many teams that feel like they are in that sort of mediocre area but need an upgrade at the quarterback position. And maybe you could look to the NFC South as well and talk yourself into the Saints. But, you know, I have a hard time believing that either one of those teams are going to, again, and maybe I'm off base here, and maybe that there are going to be more opportunities, but I feel like if Wilson were to be bad this year and get benched, I just feel like the chances of him landing on his feet somewhere else are low. Now, again, I think that there is somewhat of a roadmap towards him being able to maybe find one of those middling teams and giving them a chance, but I'm not totally sure. Says him as a backup kind of gives me Tyrod Taylor vibes. And Tyrod Taylor is, I think, one of the best backup quarterbacks, really, that we've had in the NFL for years. No, he's not necessarily going to, transform your franchise by any means, but Tyrod Taylor is a very solid veteran presence. Now, the question is Russell Wilson's accomplished enough in his career that he could walk away from the game of football without being a journeyman backup quarterback, and he would still be satisfied with the results. He expects more out of himself, but at the same time, he can provide you that leadership, and for whatever it's worth, and this is a point I wanted to make, and Tyrod Taylor, the way he plays sort of ties into that. I do love for the Steelers this season how Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are at least a little bit cut from the same cloth. Russell Wilson was one of the, original improviser quarterbacks where, any broken play he could turn into a massive gain somehow. And Justin Fields has that potential to some degree. He's leaned very heavily in being a run-first quarterback over the past couple years. And last year, they sort of went away from it. I almost wish the Bears would have embraced the fact that Justin Fields was literally one of the top rushers in the league in 2022. Now, I don't expect that for Wilson, but like we just talked about on the show the other day, Russell Wilson had his career high in rush attempts, or not his career high, but the most rush attempts he's had in a season since 2022 it was, I believe, and that's with him getting benched partway through the year. So it seems like Wilson is willing to use his legs, do whatever it takes for him to carve out a role for himself. And I think that, ultimately, I'm rooting for both of these players because they are both starting caliber to some degree. Now, I am probably a little bit lower than mainstream media is on Russell Wilson at this point, but I do think that they both give you chances to win in their own right. But again, if I'm the Steelers, I understand there's so much pressure in that organization right now to win playoff games, but Justin Fields may still be special. And that's the one that I'm really pulling for because, again, Wilson has already shown that he is, I would have to imagine he's a Hall of Famer at this point. It would be an interesting debate. I think that Wilson probably meets that category, but that would be a little bit of an interesting conversation there. Let me know whether or not you think Wilson is a Hall of Famer. But he is not the only quarterback that is undergoing some types of limitations in practice at this point, because yesterday we got news a little bit more on the other side of the spectrum that Falcons quarterback Kirk Cousins has been medically cleared to practice in training camp so far. So we're going to break down exactly what the specifics that came out along with that are and what we can expect from Cousins headed into, I believe, his age 36 season and coming off of a torn Achilles. So we'll be diving into all of that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to break down some of the updates from NFL training camp. And yesterday we got the news that Kirk Cousins has medically been cleared to practice. I'm gonna actually just clean up a little spelling error there. But Kirk Cousins has been medically cleared for training camp, and he, according to the Falcons organization, he's not going to be a full participant from day one. He's going to be limited to, quote, modified reps for whatever that means. I'm sure it just means to some degree, just less contact. Obviously, it's not like quarterbacks are ever really subjected to it all that much in their own training camps, but I think that it's a very positive sign for sure with the Falcons to see Kirk Cousins back. He tore his Achilles in Week 8 last year. He was starting to help turn the season around for the Vikings, who got off to a little bit of a slow start, suffered some tough losses at the end of these games, but ultimately was showing the value that he has as a legitimate, borderline top 10 quarterback. I think that a lot of people would have him definitively in that top 10 at the way he was playing last year up until his injury. And obviously it goes down in sort of the most disastrous way possible with the torn Achilles injury. He is headed into his age 36 season, so it is going to be tough. And even if he's not the most mobile of quarterbacks, of course, but even still, just mobility and being a running threat are two different things in my eyes, where every quarterback needs to be mobile. Not every quarterback needs to be able to take off up the field for 10, 20-yard gains, but you have to be able to navigate the pocket. So I feel like a lot of people are sort of underplaying it. By no means am I saying that he can't recover from this, because he is he's been such a solid, dependable veteran for a number of years. And sure, there's all of the primetime numbers, and I'm not gonna disagree with you if you don't think that Kirk Cousins is an elite quarterback, because I'm with you. But he is just about everything you could ask for from a dependable starter. Now, Falcons obviously paid him big this offseason. I believe the exact details of the contract: 4 years, $180 million. It's more front-loaded, a little bit less guarantees on the last couple years. It's 2 or 3 years fully guaranteed. But for the Falcons, this is sort of a similar situation. We just talked about the Steelers in last year having inadequacy from the quarterback position with a number of different options. That was the same situation last year with the Falcons, where I don't know if there was I don't know if I've ever seen a worse plan at quarterback than what the Falcons ran out last year, where they had an opportunity. And part of the reason why I'm so harsh on the Falcons in this is it seemed like they had a golden opportunity to, try and at least make a move for Lamar Jackson, but instead ownership is talking about they're confident in Desmond Ridder. Maybe I'm a little salty, because I think it would have been a really cool, almost full circle moment that, at least in my eyes, Michael Vick was sort of the original, dual threat quarterback, the one that really popularized it. I know there's others as well. You can throw Steve Young into that category, but at least in my lifetime, Michael Vick was sort of the one, and having Lamar Jackson sort of becoming the second coming of him, I just think it would have been a really cool storyline, and the Falcons kind of robbed us of it for Desmond Ridder, who, again, it's just, I don't really know what they were ever really expecting that to come into. Desmond Ridder, they took him day 2 a couple years ago. He was either a second or a third round pick. He was a third round pick, and even when he played in 2022, I didn't see much at all of, real flashes, and it came into fruition that, yeah, no, he just was not that good. The red zone possessions with the Falcons last year were atrocious, which is why, sort of similarly, the Falcons were just looking for more stability at that quarterback position, and I expect that Kirk Cousins is going to be able to provide that to some degree. And the Falcons have so many of these young skill position players that they have drafted in the first round the past few years, and they're going to have to start paying them big money if they are going to retain them. You look at the likes of Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson, all three of them premier offensive positions and drafted within the top 10 in the past 3 drafts. So the Falcons understand that they're not on a time clock necessarily in terms of trying to force success, because I don't think that anybody truly considers the Falcons one of these elite Super Bowl contenders, but at the same time, they are in a wide open NFC South, and I think the NFC as a whole is pretty open. We saw the Packers be able to sort of burst onto the scene, and I'm not trying to take anything away from the Packers. They earned that run that they put together, and Jordan Love was incredibly impressive there. But last year we had the first ever 7-seed upset in the playoffs since they expanded, and sure, small sample size. I'm not trying to put too much weight on that necessarily, but the Packers also had a goal. They almost beat the 49ers in the divisional round. Like, it doesn't feel like there are any world beaters. There's not, the Chiefs standing in the way. The 49ers are a very good team, and I've reiterated this throughout the past couple weeks that I still stand by. I think the 49ers are the best team in the NFC, but I don't think that there is anybody that should be seen as this world beater that you can't get through. Like, the 49ers are the obstacle, but I also feel like there's probably some sense of teams saying, look, this is a conference that is waiting to have somebody sort of take over. And it's been the 49ers conference. Maybe we feel differently about that team and everything if they end up winning one of those past couple Super Bowls, but even them, they're going to get way more expensive in years to come, as Brock Purdy's going to need a deal. We see Ayuk and Trent Williams holding out of training camp currently. It's not like they are completely great vibes cruising into the season smoothly. They have their bumps that they have to iron out this season and for the seasons to come. So the Falcons feel like you get Kirk Cousins in there, if he can perform like a top 10 quarterback. The defense was already sort of overachieving last season to some degree. They bring in Raheem Morris as their new head coach, former defensive coordinator of the LA Rams, who I personally am very high on, and I believe that Morris can deliver a lot of success in Atlanta if they get some stable quarterback play. And that's what they're hoping for Kirk Cousins. So I feel good about them to that extent. Again, I don't know if I'm necessarily picking them to win any playoff games just yet, but we're going to have to see how Kirk Cousins looks, and getting the updates that we have so far, everything sounds like good news up to this point. So that is currently where we're at with the Falcons. Now, I feel like it is worth at least mentioning, of course, the selection of Michael Penix Jr., who they took in the first round this year, to be the successor of the Falcons. I was trying to think, or be the successor of Kirk Cousins for the franchise quarterback of the Falcons, but I was trying to think this out because, and just in terms of what it sort of looks like, the most recent somewhat similar example would be the Packers, where Aaron Rodgers, coming off of, a good season. I wouldn't say it was the best all time in the 2020 season, I believe it was, but they end up taking Jordan Love, as Aaron Rodgers seems to still be playing at a very high level, and Aaron Rodgers delivers multiple MVPs after taking Jordan Love. So I think that ultimately, that's a far more overblown conversation. Aaron Rodgers, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but Jordan Love was picked in the 20s. He came from a smaller school, and in Utah State, Michael Penix Jr. was legitimately incredible at Washington, played in a pro-style offense. He was letting it rip down the field. He had NFL caliber wide receivers for sure, and Dunze and McMillan and Polk, so he had his share of weapons around him, and the offensive line was pretty good. So I say all of this just not to tear Penix down, but I think even more so just to show what type of potential he has when he has a good situation around him. And he always sort of flashed that potential, even going back to Indiana. Injuries, a massive part of his overall story, and I just feel like ultimately here, the Falcons are trying to avoid the quarterback controversy with Penix, splitting second-team reps currently with Taylor Heineke, throwing Kirk Cousins into those first-team reps with the modified reps to whatever degree that may be. But, you know, I thought I had to almost mention the Penix part of this conversation and just sort of speculate on what the future could look like there. I feel like we get Cousins for at least 2 seasons. And then from there, we'll kind of have to see. I think the out for the Falcons is after the 3rd year, but it could be after the 2nd. Again, in terms of the guaranteed, non-guaranteed, I don't have all the details right in front of me, but ultimately, you know, I feel like if Kirk Cousins can give them multiple good seasons and just be a steady force for them, the Falcons can almost turn things around, because they've just been so stuck in middle ground. Everybody sort of was making fun of Arthur Smith. The Falcons weren't necessarily being taken quite as seriously as they would have hoped to, and they were for a lot of that Matt Ryan tenure, and that Kirk Cousins can be a very expensive but a good bridge quarterback option that also gives them some amount of chance for the next couple of years with an open NFC. Kenneth Grunfelder, our host of the GSMC football podcast, it's same as us, a little bit earlier. Definitely be sure to check out his show. You can check him out on the YouTube page. He asks, do you think Kirk Cousins should play in the preseason? Ultimately, the preseason is sort of, at this point, it seems like it is something that is going to only be more and more diminished. I'd say probably not. It's an interesting conversation, because I understand you want to get the full speed reps, but with Cousins at this point, he's seen enough NFL games that, yeah, it might look a little bit rocky at the start if he doesn't get these full speed game reps up until the actual season comes along. But at the same time, for Cousins, you know, he's playing in an NFC South that it doesn't feel like there are a ton of competitors, and I'll get to Schatz' comments here in a second, but he says Falcons will be around 10-7-ish, which I agree with, and I don't think that there are really any other teams in that conference that are going to be making a real push. Like, 10 wins should win the NFC South. The Saints can maybe be in the conversation, but the Panthers, in my eyes, are still very far away. It would take, you know, kind of a miracle bounce-back season for Bryce Young, and I still don't really see that happening. The Buccaneers won last year, and the Buccaneers, they're a solid team. They're going to be solid again, but I still, you know, they won the division with 9 games last year. So I feel like slow play it a little bit if you are the Falcons. There's no need to jump at the opportunity and force Kirk Cousins into a situation that's ultimately going to, if Kirk Cousins goes down, I mean, they'll have Michael Penix for sure. So, like, I can't say their season would be totally lost, but in terms of they want to win some football games this year and establish a culture there, and I think that Kirk Cousins is imperative to that. Shots Below the Belt says, I honestly like the Falcons drafting a quarterback. It's going to be some time for the Falcons to have a potential future quarterback. Falcons will be 10-7-ish around Cousins, so their draft placement is bad. I absolutely hear that argument, and the reality is the Falcons, all the stories came out that they had Penix as the second, third quarterback on the board. At that point, when they're drafting at 8, they've already seen a number of these quarterbacks go, and you kind of have to take a stab at it if you believe in him. Now, I have some doubts with Penix, so I can see both sides of the argument here, because you're right. If everything works out in the Falcons' plan, and Terry Fontenot, I think, is their general manager, he talked about best case scenario, Michael Penix doesn't play for 4 years, which is a little bit of a crazy thing to say in terms of you just spent a top 8 pick on this guy. But I also see the point, because you talk about the positional importance of quarterback, their draft placement. Again, if everything goes to plan here for the Falcons, that Penix is going to be sort of the successor, and you hope that Kirk Cousins plays at a high level for the next few years and that he can help you win some games. And by the time that, a handful of years from now, he'll be 38, 39, 40 years old, and you can have Penix sort of seamlessly transition in, which, again, that's sort of drawing up the plan for the Falcons in a storybook. Obviously, we know the NFL and sports in general don't necessarily always work that way. We'll probably find some sort of middle ground where, again, I think Cousins plays for the Falcons for 2 seasons, maybe 3 seasons before seeing Penix take over. But let me know what your expectations are for the Kirk Cousins era in Atlanta, what your expectations are. But we're going to be taking our next break here. We just talked about Michael Penix and the fact that it's going to be a little bit for him to have an impact on the Falcons, but there are a number of rookies in the NFL who have great opportunities this season to make an impact immediately. So that's what we're going to be diving into, is the list of rookies who have the chance to shine the most in their first season. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we are now going to be diving into some of the rookies in the NFL who are going to have the best opportunities to be impact players and players that I have belief in terms of making their mark early on in their careers. As you can see for our video viewers, number one, and by the way, leaving quarterbacks out of this because I'm sure you've heard enough of the quarterback analysis. Every quarterback that plays has a chance to shine, so I steered away from them here. Just wanted to make that note ahead of time. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is the first player I have on this list. I think that a lot of times fans get excited about the rookie wide receivers, and they can definitely make an impact. Last year we saw the likes of Zay Flowers and Rashee Rice end up having very meaningful roles for their teams and for competitive teams at that. But I do feel like, a lot of times the overall excitement with the rookies, it can take a little bit more time than we initially anticipate to make a splash in the NFL. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a day one stud, in my opinion. He was incredibly pro ready. You saw the way where he was able to do just about everything. I just feel like the patience that he plays with almost as well, all within being an extremely explosive athlete. He just looks the part, and I think he's going to have a crucial role in the Cardinals organization this upcoming season with Kyler Murray in a little bit of a prove-it year. Now at this point, hopefully, knock on wood, getting a full season out of him from a health standpoint. And Harrison can be the best wide receiver. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, obviously, you look at the overall stature of him, but it was an older version of DeAndre Hopkins. I think that Marvin Harrison's ceiling is extremely high. Now, I probably just backed myself into a corner with the comparison to DeAndre Hopkins, so I'm just going to leave it at Marvin Harrison Jr. can be, the running mate for Kyler Murray for years to come. And if Kyler is going to succeed, where I have my doubts, I'm sure a lot of you have your doubts, as we've done Kyler Murray content before. I've seen a lot of negativity towards Kyler, but he's still an ultra-talented player when he is healthy, and Marvin Harrison Jr. can help expand his game while just being, a day one guy for himself and carving out a role, whether it is Kyler, whether it's anyone else. I expect him to be able to shine. The pick right after him, number 5 overall, Joe Alt. I know it's not necessarily the sexy thing to talk about offensive linemen, but it is if you ask Jim Harbaugh, because what he is looking to do is establish a new culture, and it's playing in the trenches. And he's been very vocal about that it is extremely important to win the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And Joe Alt, he is just a physical monster, and I think he is going to be able to step into a role here and sort of be the franchise guy for the Chargers. He's going to be extremely important to the run game, of course, which is sort of the Jim Harbaugh specialty, but also for the sake of being the blindside tackle to help protect Justin Herbert. I do want to double check here really quick. He played left tackle in college. I do just want to confirm that Chargers are looking at having him at left, because actually that's why I'm glad I double checked, because I totally forgot for a second about Rashawn Slater. So Alta's going to be on the right side. That is, if they live up to their potential, and you have 2 potential cornerstones at each tackle position, plus Zion Johnson, former first-round pick at left guard. That is a pretty impressive front. And again, I do think that Alt is going to be very impactful. As very quickly here, just back to the Marvin Harrison Jr. point, Shots Below the Belt says the Cardinals haven't had a dependable go-to receiver since Larry Fitzgerald, but those are some big shoes to fill. Those are Hall of Fame shoes to fill, but to be fair, we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. When you talk about big shoes to fill, it's literally in his name that he's the son of a he's the son of a Hall of Famer in Marvin Harrison. So I think that he's probably long before even being drafted by the Cardinals, he has had it in his mind that he has a lot to live up to. And I think that he's going to be able to pay that bill. Another offensive lineman here. Again, we're going to move off of them to some degree, but I think that this is an incredibly important spot for Olu Fashanu here with the New York Jets, considering, first off, I think that Fashanu, the fact that he dropped as far as he did was a little bit of a surprise to me. I think that he was, neck and neck with Joe Alt for the best offensive tackle prospect in this draft. He ends up going to 11, which kind of ends up being almost a perfect spot. Now, the issue is he going to be buried in the depth chart from year one? They go and they acquire Morgan Moses. I always forget if they were traded for Moses. They brought in John Simpson and Morgan Moses. I always forget which one was free agency, which one was the trade. Both Ravens offensive starters from last season. But they also signed Tyron Smith to a deal. Now, that is an opportunity where Tyron Smith, when he plays, he is all-pro caliber, but injuries have gotten the best of him in, past seasons, and I feel like Fashanu could be able to be somebody who steps in a big role, and Aaron Rodgers needs to have an offensive line in front of him at this point if he's going to have success. Fashanu could become a massive part of that. Brock Bowers is another one. Brock Bowers, he kind of ends up in a situation where almost when you look at where the Raiders were in their draft positioning, they were hoping for a quarterback, but as soon as Bo Nix goes right in front of them, they didn't really have a choice because, we saw the next quarterback didn't get drafted till Spencer Rattler in what was something like the 5th round, something along those lines. So Bowers probably knows to some degree he wasn't the number one option, but at that point, it was 100% the right decision for the Raiders because Bowers was the best player on the board. He is someone who can be extremely versatile in what he does. Now, that almost... It plays into an interesting aspect because you look at their quarterback situation, it's Gardner Minshew and it is Aiden O'Connell. Neither one of them are tremendous quarterback talent, so I think that it almost benefits Bowers if he does play a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage and can be a little bit of a safety valve. We saw Gardner Minshew last season, really liked throwing to his tight ends as well, so I think that Bowers is going to just be a player that no matter what situation he's in, he's going to be able to find different ways to impact the field, impact the game, and I am really looking forward to seeing what he can provide almost as a sneaky threat behind Davante Adams. Adams is going to get all of the attention, but Bowers can be somebody who does a lot of the damage off of that almost, and watching the receiver documentary, Adams was big on the idea of, or the show that came out on Netflix just recently. He was talking about how he can learn to live with not getting the ball all the time as long as the offense looks like an actual offense and that it isn't quite as bad as it was last year during those games with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, even when Brian Hoyer was in there briefly. It was a bad year for the Raiders offensively, but Bowers is just going to be a weapon where no matter where he is on the field, he is going to be a weapon. Shots Below the Belt says, why didn't the Raiders trade up for a quarterback? I guess the silver and black are all in with Minshew, and he was decent last year with the Colts. I think that ultimately, I don't know why they didn't, truthfully, because they are just kind of in that weird ground where I believe they had the 12th overall pick, which was already after a number of other teams. Obviously, as we saw, 6 quarterbacks that went in the first round. There were a lot of teams they would have had to jump over. It would have cost them a lot from an asset perspective to be able to make that type of a move. But I don't know. It is a good question. I guess they're in with Minshew, and Minshew gave the Colts a chance to win. And I feel like that's just what the Raiders are going to hope here as Antonio Pierce tries to lead this Raiders team into just being in on the product that they have, because under McDaniels, it was a mess. Running a little long here, so we got to kick it into overdrive a little bit. Liatu Latu, the first defender drafted off of the board, went to the Indianapolis Colts, and Latu, I just like some of the others I mentioned, if he is healthy, he is 100% going to be an impact guy. I thought this was a stellar pickup for the Colts, and I expect him to be one of the best edge rushers, not just of this class, which was a very talented edge rusher class, but possibly, of the recent draft picks we've saw in the 2020s. I think that Latu has a ceiling maybe higher than anybody else. Byron Murphy of the Seattle Seahawks played at Texas, and he's coming into a situation with Mike McDonald, the new head coach of Seattle, and I think that he is just going to be able to be a force inside. Last year, we saw that the past couple years, the Seahawks have really struggled in terms of stopping the run, and they tried to address that need by going out at the trade deadline last year, making a move for Leonard Williams. But I think that Byron Murphy can sort of slide into whatever you need out of him, whether it is D-end or D-tackle. I think he can provide multiple looks, and I think that McDonald's going to be able to get the most out of him. Terrion Arnold, I've been a day one fan of this pick for the Lions. They absolutely need to shore up that secondary. Arnold has elite talent, and I think that he is going to be incredibly important for the Lions as they do try and sort of come back with vengeance. They understand the target's going to be on their back after making the NFC Championship game. They're not sneaking up on anybody, but shoring up that defense is going to be massive, and I think that Arnold can be a part of that. A couple second-round picks that we'll just quickly get through here. Mike Sanderstill of the Washington Commanders played college ball at Michigan. Just an elite athlete. He started off as a wide receiver, made the transition to the defensive side of the ball, and he's just incredibly versatile. I'm curious where they end up using him in terms of if they put him on the outside or if they have him running a nickel corner position, but either way, I think that Sanderstill is going to be able to carve out a very important role for himself in a defense led by new head coach Dan Quinn with that defensive background, of course. Adam Frazier, taken just after him, probably going to be the starting center for the Steelers this upcoming season. There were a lot of things that were wrong with the Steelers offense last year, the quarterback being the most notable one, but also the run game should have been significantly better than it was. Now, obviously, the lack of a pass game plays into that, but the offensive line just also was not good enough. Frazier was unbelievable at West Virginia. I was surprised that he dropped as far as he did. An injury late into his season is probably why that was part of the drop, but I think he's going to have an important role with the Steelers for the coming years. And then finally, Cole Bishop of the Buffalo Bills, another situation where they lost a lot of their help in the secondary last season. Bishop was a stud at the University of Utah, and I expect him to be able to carve out a very important role for himself in year one. Hard hitter, too, so I'm really excited to see him. But let me know which rookies, again, if I left off any rookies, there's going to be a number of them that have, impactful roles, of course, but we only have so much time here. So these were just some of the biggest ones that stood out to me. Shots Below the Belt says, nice analysis. Well, thank you. Now, a 1-minute rant on how New England Patriots fans feel about Drake May. Well, very quickly here, what I'll give you on Drake May is I'm very excited. He was the quarterback that I wanted the Patriots to go out and get this season. It was between him and Jaden Daniels, really seemed like that was going to be the case. I was, watching last year almost, and it was such a dirty feeling, but I was rooting for them to lose at that point when they were so bad, and when they cost themselves the number 2 pick, I was really disappointed. But obviously Jaden Daniels, who I still think can be a good player, he ends up going number 2 to Washington. And Drake May, I think that ultimately, as far as he's probably not going to get a ton of time this season. Obviously, they bring in Jacoby Brissett, who can be a great bridge quarterback option for them. And there's still things that he needs to work out, mechanically. But you look at the physical build that he has, the arm talent that he has, he pretty much checks off all of the boxes that you could want from a quarterback in the NFL in 2024. So I think that if he even does make a debut, it's going to be late in the year. The Patriots have a late bye week this season, so it's not like there is sort of a clear spot for him to hop in the middle of the season. When they come back from London, partway through the season, they play there something like week 7-ish. I don't have the schedule in front of me. That maybe in one of those games, there's a Titans game, a Bears game, maybe one of those he could make a debut. But I am definitely very encouraged with him for the years to come. But we're going to be taking our next break now, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the upcoming season preview for the Indianapolis Colts. So we will be getting into that, but first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. As now we are going to be continuing on our season previews for all 32 NFL teams. Today we have the Indianapolis Colts. And with the Colts, obviously a team that had seemed to have sort of middling expectations, but last year showed a ton of promise. Now it starts, of course, with Anthony Richardson, who they took 4th overall in the 23 draft. And he came out for being a prospect where the entire reputation around him was being that he was a very raw prospect. He sort of flashed from day one, and he flashed from the perspective of being able to, go out there and perform and having that high ceiling that we knew of him, but did a really good job, I thought, of, maneuvering the pocket, avoiding contact, and obviously injuries became a big part of the story for him, where he only started 4 games. He left 2 of them with injuries. One of them was a fluke. I think it was when he had already, scored. He had run into the end zone and he came down on that shoulder weird, but Anthony Richardson, Colts fans have to feel incredibly encouraged by what he put out on the field last season. And obviously, it's a major disappointment seeing how that turned out for him from a health perspective. But the fact that they were able to go out, win 9 games, and be in contention for a playoff spot, if it weren't for that stupid play that I don't want to dive into too much because the majority of people listening probably won't even remember, but that 4th down call where it was Gardner Minshew in, he tried to check it down to a running back that wasn't Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor wasn't even in on the play on that play. Just whole side point there. But the Colts were right on the edge of making the playoffs last year, which would have been an extreme, exceeding expectations. And they have to feel like they're probably in a pretty good situation to do so again this year. And when you look at Anthony Richardson, you look at some of the moves they made this offseason in trying to shore up the options around him. They re-signed Michael Pittman Jr. to a new contract. They go out and they get Adonai Mitchell with, I think it was the 51st overall pick, way later than anybody really anticipated. The fact that people had concerns maybe with his personality, but you see him on the field and he's a baller. He can go up, he can make the physical plays, he has the impressive speed from somebody his size. I think that he's going to absolutely be an effective player. You also there's Josh Downs, there's a number of pretty not just passable, but very good tight end options as well. Anthony Richardson is going to have a number of tools in his arsenal around him to be able to take advantage. And the run game, obviously, is sort of the identity of this team with Jonathan Taylor, with having a top 10 offensive line in the league as well. And it's something that I definitely think Anthony Richardson can also enhance because of the fact that, again, when fully healthy, I'm sure the Colts will probably try and be at least a little bit resistant to fully throw him out into the fire and put his body on the line. But he's somebody that I think could develop an unreal sort of dual threat attack in terms of him and Jonathan Taylor. The read options could be nightmarish for opposing defenses if things play out the way that the Colts are hoping that they can. So, last year, top 10 scoring offense from a team led by Gardner Minshew, and like we just talked about in the last segment, Gardner Minshew is fine. He's a good player, but by no means is he somebody that you have expectations for him, delivering 23 points per game necessarily. And, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh there to some degree, but you have to feel like, there's probably going to be some moments where it looks like Anthony Richardson is a quarterback that only had, sub 15 starts when he was in college at Florida. But I think that ultimately, if he's able to iron out some of those accuracy concerns, he's going to be a scary player. Schott says, people are saying Richardson is like Lamar Jackson's running ability and Josh Allen's arm strength. Is it an overreaction? To say that that's what he is today, yes, that's an overreaction. But in terms of what his projections are, you look at him, he is a friggin' tank. And he probably doesn't have, I'd be curious to see what the differences are in terms of, top speeds between him and Lamar Jackson. I have to feel like he's probably a smidge slower than Lamar Jackson, but I think he has a real feel for it as well. And you look at him, he's a friggin' tank the way that he's built. And I think that he has all of the arm strength in the world. It's just, again, a matter of making sure that he can apply those physical attributes and convert them into the most beneficial way of applying them to the passing game itself. But he's going to be a scary player if he does hit his ceiling. When you look at the defense for the Colts last year, not stellar. You look across the team and you feel like there are a number of pretty good players, former first-round picks in Kwity Paye and DeForest Buckner. I was a big fan of EJ Speed. They re-signed Zaire Franklin this past offseason, but outside of that defensive front, there are still a lot of things to kind of be asked of them, and that would probably be the situation where if you aren't going to be in on the Colts this year, it's probably going to be a combination of Anthony Richardson maybe making some mistakes every once in a while that hurt the Colts, and the defense on the other end not necessarily being able to make up for them. They played fine last year. They were, a little bit below average in the majority of categories, and again, hopefully you see some of these younger players. I mentioned, I think that Laiatu Latu is going to be an incredible addition because you look at what they did this offseason. It was really more so than anything. They didn't go out and bring in any big-time names. It was more so just about solidifying their core, making sure they get them back. They get Zaire Franklin back on a new contract. Obviously, we talked about Michael Pittman Jr., but they bring back Julian Blackmon. They bring back Grover Stewart, their defensive tackle. And Latu is really the addition for them, where he's probably going to, I don't know, I'm curious what the playing time situation looks like for him because there is already so much talent on that defensive front that the Colts, I'm assuming at least, they saw the draft board. It's like, this dude is just way too good to be sitting here. We can make him into the monster that we believe. I think neck injuries were part of the issue with him. So again, there are some red flags with Latu, but if he plays, he's going to be incredible in my opinion. Looking at their schedule here, Sharp Football Analysis has them with the 7th easiest schedule in the NFL this year, playing in the AFC South, of course. So, a division that I don't know if they necessarily fully get their credit in terms of they can be very competitive. The Texans coming out of nowhere last year, and the Colts, to be fair, are kind of one of those teams that it almost feels like, because of the fact that they don't feel like this world beater that kind of brings down the division to some degree, but they're a good team. Them, the Texans, and the Jaguars are all in very good positions headed into next season. I'm still not in on the Titans. I feel like they're probably a year or so away. I am intrigued in Will Levis's upside, but we'll save that whole conversation for when we actually look at the Titans' upcoming schedule. But I mean, you look across the board, really not all too many difficult out-of-division games. They play the NFC North, so that game week 2 against the Packers is probably that one, and week 12 at home against the Lions are the ones that really jump off of the page. But I think this is a very winnable, schedule when you look at it. Ultimately, their over-underline is set at 8.5, and I have them going just over that mark for another 9-8 season. Can be in competition for that division and for a playoff spot once again. Now, if I were to have any concerns, it would be, how does Anthony Richardson look like in a full year's worth of playing time? But I think that under Shane Steichen, he is a great offensive mind in my opinion. We're going to see this run game continue to get better. There's a number of different options for Anthony Richardson as well. So I think that 9-8 is around the ballpark of where the Colts are going to end up. Looking at how that compares to the other teams, I do have to apologize here. Yesterday, I went through the Texans' schedule, and I accidentally went through their 2023 schedule in what was a total boneheaded move. And that ended up, I was looking at their schedule from last year, and I gave them a couple extra wins, so I went back, redid it. I have them at 10 wins now, which is still good. I think that their over-under is at 9.5 as well. So I have the Colts just behind the Texans. I think that either one of those teams could be a little bit fluid there. Hopes are very high on the Texans. I could see a little bit of a humbling start to next year before they figure themselves out once again, even though I do have a lot of belief in them. And I think that the Colts are going to absolutely be in that conversation for the AFC South. And yeah, I worry about the defense a little bit, but ultimately I see another winning season coming for them. So let me know where your expectations are at for the Colts for next season. But we are now going to be taking our final break of the show. And when we come back on the other side, we have some MLB news to dive into with a big-time trade that was made yesterday. May even give a little bit of an update on some breaking news on a trade that just came out. So we are going to be diving into all of that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. The plan was to dive into the trade that the Seattle Mariners made just yesterday, acquiring outfielder Randy Arozarena, but we're going to have to postpone that into Monday's show, maybe do a little bit of a trade deadline special for the MLB, because we have some breaking news that the Miami Dolphins have agreed to a new contract extension with quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, according to Ian Rappaport. So it looks like the deal is 4 years, $212.4 million to lock him in for the foreseeable future. He has $167.1 million guaranteed, which is the most amount of guaranteed money ever in a 4-year deal in history, according to Rappaport. So this is a very interesting development because it sounded like contract negotiations between the Dolphins and Tua were dying down, that the Dolphins were trying to, about a month ago, I feel like I saw the report that the Dolphins are going to try and give one last deal, and if that doesn't go, then they're going to just continue to play out this season and see where it goes from here. But that is obviously no longer the case, so we're going to do a little bit of math on the air, which is never a great strategy, but it's going to be around $53 million per season in terms of average annual value, so somewhat on par with the other contracts that were handed out this season with Jared Goff and Trevor Lawrence. This number is a little bit shorter, I believe, than what Trevor Lawrence reached. I think he was at $55 million a year, but this is still a very big deal, obviously, for the Dolphins to lock down Tua long term. And as for kind of where I'm at with Tua at this point in his career, I mean, you can't deny the fact that he is a very solid option. Now, I was higher on him coming out of college, and it hasn't really translated the way that I was hoping, and I feel like this could be, this is a deal where I don't think that Tua is ever going to be, a bad player for the Dolphins, and I can 100% understand the idea that if you have somebody that fits the role of what you need, you just pay for it. You don't play that game where I think that the Dolphins are an offensive system under Mike McDaniel that could succeed with a number of different quarterbacks. And I was sort of leaning towards, and again, you're running a gamble of, you already know you have something that works for them. In Tua Tagovailoa, I feel like there are better options out there probably, but the grass is always greener. So, taking that sort of a risk is obviously a risk. And I understand them sort of settling here and just saying, you know what, we feel like we can put an offense around you. Obviously, at some point, Tyreek Hill is going to probably move on from the Dolphins and things are going to look different. But Mike McDaniel has confidence in Tua. He's sort of made that very clear since the very beginning with him, that he was working with Tua almost on the daily to try and reinstill confidence, that while Tua was struggling with that for, a good amount of time there, coming out of the whole Brian Flores situation where he seemed to be anti-Tua, and instead Mike McDaniel came in and sort of resurrected that entire experiment, and it has worked I would say that it worked. They made the playoffs last year, but like Shots Below the Belt says, the Dolphins' biggest enemy during the NFL season is the weather in January and December. When it gets colder, no doubt, this is a Miami team, and Tua, to some degree, after spending his college career in Alabama, we haven't really seen him be able to play through the elements, and that's maybe a little bit of an unfair critique, but it is something that, until he proves it otherwise, that's going to be a knock against him. And for me, the weather is one thing. I also just feel like, we haven't really seen him step up in a big moment since college. And even in one of the biggest moments, and this is probably super unfair, so I apologize ahead of time, but you go back to his time in college, sort of the guy who stepped up in the biggest moment while he was having his year was Jalen Hurts, after Tua got hurt and Hurts was able to take over and lead the way for Bama. So, again, that's probably an unfair thing of me to say, but I do still feel like, I just never have faith in him, really, when the game is on the line for him to put together a drive at this point. There are all kinds of offensive weapons around him, and I personally, I'm not saying I don't have the stats in front of me or anything, but gut feeling, I'm never really with him in terms of, thinking that he's going to be able to pull off the comeback. I watched Will Levis outduel him in a primetime game on Monday Night Football earlier this year, where Levis put together, the 14-point comeback in, the fourth quarter against Tua. And granted, Tyreek Hill was dealing with injuries during that game as well, so he wasn't, fully available for them. But, I like Tua. I don't love Tua. And this is a lot of money to invest into him. But at the same time, it is the asking price for quarterbacks at this point. And as much as I feel like it is an offense that could succeed with a lot of other guys, there's still no guarantee there. You look at the 49ers situation where you can say a lot of the same things. And maybe this isn't totally fair to Jimmy Garoppolo because he helped go to a Super Bowl with Mike Shanahan, but that was a 49ers team that didn't really fully get off the ground, even though they threw a ton of money at Jimmy Garoppolo there. They moved multiple draft assets to go up and draft Trey Lance third overall in 2021. Injuries, part of both of their struggles, really, but even still, Shanahan was never really bought into either one of them. And in comes Brock Purdy, where sure, you say, well, anybody could have done that. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I mean, there are a lot of quarterbacks, don't get me wrong, that could succeed in San Francisco, but you say that, and ultimately, you see a couple failures there. And for the Dolphins, I do understand wanting to have some security. I'm not the biggest Tua guy. Now, he led the NFL in passing yards last season, and he is, he's still young. I want to double check on his age here, but he was in that 2020 draft class, I believe, so he's still got plenty of time. I'm not even really so concerned about injuries with him quite as much anymore. Like, obviously, that was a big storyline in 2022 when he was suffering those couple concussions, but sounds like he did a lot of work in the offseason to, sort of learn how to fall better, which sounds like a ridiculous thing, but it's kind of real. You have to do everything you can to sort of best protect your body. And, I know that Tua also had some of the lower body stuff coming out of college, but that hasn't proven to be an issue for them just yet. But I don't know. It's interesting how you want to weigh all of these different things, because I could also be on Tua is good. Again, 4,600 yards last season and 29 touchdowns. You will take that all the time. But I don't know. I think that it's a fine move for the Dolphins. I understand it. I don't know 100% if this is the way I would have gone. I would have been interested to see him sort of play out this season and reevaluate next summer. You could franchise tag him if need be and work out a long-term deal, because I feel like there still is a good amount that Tua needs to prove, and they jumped at the opportunity to do so, which has kind of been the story with a lot of these teams. You can make that same argument for Jared Goff earlier this year, and I defended the deal for the Lions of signing Jared Goff to this deal. But at the same time, you can look at either one of these situations and say, I think that you had a great year last year. Let's see you do it one more time, and then we'll know if we can re-up with you and give you the bag. And Jared Goff is a little bit of a different situation, I feel like, because it's not like Ben Johnson is a great offensive coordinator there. The Lions have a lot of weapons around him with the running back duo of Montgomery and Gibbs, and receivers and Amon-Ra, and I guess you can throw Jamison Williams in there. But Laporta, obviously, is probably who I should have gone to second in terms of the receiving threats. But I think that, in both of these situations, I think that Goff is probably, they have Super Bowl expectations, and they feel like it's almost a statement to pay Jared Goff. You can also make that argument for the Dolphins, though, as well. So I know I'm contradicting myself a little bit throughout this segment, and I apologize for it. Still trying to improve my game in terms of reacting to breaking news like this. Shots below the belt says Dolphins to the Super Bowl. No, in my opinion. I think there are a number of teams that are better than them. I really struggle to see a way that they beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and I would take the Bengals over them when fully healthy. I'd probably take the Bills over them when fully healthy. And to be fair, the Dolphins were dealing with a ton of injuries as well when the playoffs came around last year, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, where I don't think that their defense gets enough credit as much as their offense is extremely innovative and it has so much talent, the speed just at every skill position. But at the same time, I think that their defense, we saw all of their edge rushers basically go down, and they lost some of them this offseason. I like the addition of Chop Robinson in the first round this year, but, it is what it is. And I'm sorry, Dolphins fans that are out there that are like, who is this guy trashing on my team? I'm not trying to trash. I think there's a lot of talent there. It's just, I'm not sure if Tua is the guy that takes you over the hump in this competitive AFC where there's just so many good quarterbacks there. And again, I don't really know what the other pivot would have been, that there aren't really any other immediate upgrades there. Like, I would have been interested, though, to play out this year with Tua and see if Dak Prescott ends up hitting the open market and if he's willing to go somewhere else. Now, Schefter has been talking the past couple of days about the idea that he's going to make over $60 million. So, that's an insanely steep price to pay. And if you get Tua on 53 and he gives you what he gave you last season for the most part, you'll take that every time. But I don't know. It's an interesting conversation, and I just feel like I don't really view the Dolphins as, I'm not going to say they have no chance necessarily, but I would genuinely be surprised. Like, if you're going to tell me, if you come from the future to me right now and say the Dolphins win the Super Bowl this year, I would hesitate to believe you. But, and even if I were to get there, I would say, how many quarterbacks in the AFC got hurt? But, again, maybe being unfair there. Sorry, Dolphins fans. But that is all the time we have for today. Again, had to push off the baseball segment for today. I'm sure you can check out the Sam Menzie and the GSMC baseball podcast that is set to take place 7 minutes from now. So he will keep you up to date with that. We'll be back on Monday with maybe a little bit of a special for the MLB trade deadline, but running out of time here. So that is all the time we have. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. Have yourselves a great weekend, and we will be back on Monday afternoon, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.